Okay, let's dive into the technology that completely flipped the script on darkness. This is the story of how we learned to own the night.
You know, for most of human history, night was this massive barrier. It dictated the rules of engagement. But in the 20th century, that all started to change, and fast.
So, the secret wasn't about making our eyes more powerful. Nope, it was about learning how to see a totally different kind of light, one that's been around us all along. And this right here, this is the key. Even on what seems like a pitch-black night, the world is actually flooded with near-infrared light. From the moon, the stars, even just the sky. There is a ton of light out there. Our eyes just aren't built to see it. This is so important to get. Night vision doesn't create light, it's an amplifier. It takes those tiny, invisible whispers of light, turns them into a flood of electrons, and then slams them into a screen to create that iconic green image. It basically turns the volume on light all the way up.
But it wasn't always so sleek and cool. Oh no, the early days were messy and clunky. So let's jump back in time and see how this revolutionary idea actually got off the ground.
It's kind of a wild ride, isn't it? The whole thing started with research for televisions back in the 30s. Then you get these huge, bulky sniper scopes in World War II. It took decades of slow, hard work to get to something like the Starlight scope that troops used in Vietnam. Every single step was just building on the last.
And this slide shows the first massive leap forward. See, the earliest stuff, or Gen 0, was active. You had to basically shine a giant invisible flashlight on whatever you wanted to see. The problem? Anyone else with night vision could see your flashlight beam from a mile away. So much for being sneaky, right? The switch to passive systems, which just used the light that was already there, was a total game changer. That's when soldiers could finally become ghosts in the dark.
But the real revolution, the thing that would make modern night vision what it is today, was still to come. In the 1960s, this tiny, unassuming little component came along and changed everything.
Just try to picture an electron waterfall. A single electron goes in the top of one of these millions of tiny channels. As it bounces its way down, it knocks other electrons loose, creating an avalanche. So one electron goes in, and a torrent of thousands comes pouring out the bottom. This is the engine. This is the secret sauce that makes the image so incredibly bright. So, with this amazing new power, the US military got ambitious, really ambitious. They planned a mission that would push this new technology, and the men using it, to the absolute limit.
The mission was called Operation Eagle Claw. The plan was audacious. Fly a bunch of helicopters hundreds of miles, skimming the ground, in total darkness, deep into Iran to rescue 52 American hostages. It was a feat that would have been completely impossible just a few years earlier, and the whole thing depended on those new Gen 2 goggles.
But it was a catastrophe. It was a perfect storm of failure. An insane, totally unexpected sandstorm popped up. Helicopters started breaking down, and the goggles themselves, well, they had serious limitations. The pilots were getting completely disoriented by the super narrow 40-degree field of view. The lights inside their own cockpits were blinding the goggles. And on top of all that, they just hadn't had enough training time with the new tech. It all ended in a fatal collision on the ground. 8 American servicemen lost their lives. The mission was a total failure. It was just a brutal, devastating lesson that the technology that promised to own the night still had a long, long way to go. But out of the ashes of that failure came a new sense of urgency, a fierce determination to get it right. The lessons learned in the Iranian desert became the blueprint for the next big leap in night vision.
The key innovation was a new material right at the start of the process called gallium arsenide. Now, all you really need to know is that this stuff was way, way better at converting photons into electrons, which meant it could see much, much better in extremely dark conditions.
And the data from field tests was just undeniable. A 50% increase in how far away you could spot a target. On the battlefield, that's not just an edge, that's everything. That is the difference between life and death.
And this table here, it really shows you the cold, hard math the military was doing.
Yes, Gen 3 was more expensive, but the performance was superior, and look at the reliability. It lasted 5 times longer. So the decision became pretty clear. Gen 3 was essential for the people at the tip of the spear, the combat troops and the pilots.
But even with this incredible new Gen 3 technology, a ghost from Operation Eagle Claw still haunted them. A fundamental flaw was still there, making life difficult for soldiers in the dark.
For decades, using night vision felt like looking at the world through a soda straw. So the question is obvious, right? Why not just make the lens wider? Well, it turns out the laws of physics are pretty stubborn.
Because as this shows, trying to widen the view just created a cascade of new problems. The image would get grainier. The wider lenses would distort the picture, which is incredibly disorienting. And fixing all of that required bigger, heavier, and way more expensive lenses. It was a classic engineering catch-22.
So the solution was absolutely brilliant and completely counterintuitive. They thought, okay, if we can't make one tube wider, what if we just use more tubes?
And that's how we got panoramic night vision, by using 4 separate image tubes, 2 for each eye, and digitally stitching the images together, they blew the field of view out to 95 degrees. It more than doubled the user's situational awareness. The soda straw problem was finally dead. And this wasn't just some lab experiment. This was game-changing tech, proven by elite A-10 pilots, and most famously, used by the Special Operations Forces in the raid that brought down Osama bin Laden. It was a decisive advantage. So, from simply making starlight bright enough to see, to creating this sweeping panoramic view of the battlefield, the journey has been incredible. But it's not over. As we start fusing thermal and digital imagery directly into the goggles, you have to ask, what's next? What new worlds are we going to unlock when darkness isn't a barrier at all, but just a canvas?